Have you ever loved someone so much that you slowly erased yourself, piece by piece, just to be enough for them? This story isn't about heartbreak. It's about realizing you were never broken to begin with. If you've ever been called too much, if you've ever been made to feel like love was something to earn by bleeding quietly, it's yours. I used to think love was earned through erosion, not through warmth or safety, but through sacrifice. Through bending yourself until the curve of you matched the shape of someone else's shadow. Through shrinking your voice, your wants, your too muchness, just enough to be tolerated. I don't remember when I learned that, only that by the time I met Aryan, it already lived in my bones. He came into my life in winter. Not the soft kind with snowflakes and cinnamon, but the gray kind, cold tiles under bare feet, cloud-covered afternoons where the light never quite touches your skin. He wore silence like a well-fitted coat, buttoned to the throat, sharp at the shoulders. His presence made the room quieter, like everyone instinctively turned their volume down to accommodate him. And I, with all my softness and over-explaining and too eager laughs, thought that meant he was real, that he didn't need noise to prove his worth. He didn't flirt, not in the traditional sense. He just observed, intently, said things like, "You notice the small stuff," with a tilt of the head that made it feel like a secret. And I devoured that kind of attention. I had always been the girl who fell too fast for people who said too little. It made me feel like the chosen one, like I had been selected to decipher a code no one else could crack. We talked late one night. Actually, I talked. He listened, nodding occasionally, only asking questions when I paused long enough to doubt myself. And when I laughed at something small and unfunny, he watched me the woe. As someone watches waves, they don't stop them, they just let them crash. He texted me 2 days later, just, "You seem intense, I like that." I should have seen the warning. He used the word intense like it was both a compliment and a diagnosis, but I didn't know yet that he meant, "You feel too much." I thought he meant, "You're rare." That was my first mistake. The second came a few weeks later when he vanished. We hadn't fought. Nothing had shifted. We had dinner, quiet and casual, the kind where I kept trying to read the mood in the space between bites. I had asked him how work was, and he shrugged. I asked him what kind of music he liked, and he said, "I don't really think about that stuff." I laughed it off. The next morning, no reply. No good morning. No, sorry, I was out late. Nothing. I waited, told myself not to overreact, gave him the benefit of every doubt, checked my phone too often, then too obviously, typed messages and deleted them. Finally, after 26 hours that felt like a slow choke, I sent, "Just wanted to make sure you're okay." No answer. Another 10 hours later, "If you need space, just tell me. I don't want to assume anything." It was 3:11 a.m. when he finally responded. I still remember the exact timestamp because I had woken up, checked my phone without thinking, and felt my entire chest clench around the word, was just overwhelmed. That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just that word, overwhelmed, like I had become too loud, too close, too real. And yet, I responded with, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pressure you." I felt the shame settle in my stomach like a stone, heavy, unmoving, but I hit send anyway. Maybe if I apologized enough, he would feel safe again. Maybe if I toned it down, my words, my check-ins, my need to be noticed, he'd come back with warmth instead of distance. The irony? I was already fading. A week later, we were back to normal, or his version of normal. Cool texts, short calls, late nights where I spoke more than I should have, and he replied with half-lidded stares that made me feel both adored and unseen. I skipped dinner with friends because he said he might want to hang out. Canceled plans with my sister just in case he felt spontaneous. I started watching the shows he liked, changed my ringtone to the one he said wasn't annoying. I rewrote pieces of myself with the hope he'd highlight them instead of crossing them out. My inner world became a performance of subtle edits. Once I asked him gently, "Do you even miss me when you disappear like that?" He didn't look up from his phone, just said, You always take things too seriously. Just calm down. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't want to seem hurt. Because I'd already started to believe that if I was less me, maybe he'd love me more. Maybe if I was smaller, quieter, easier, he'd stay. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered something terrifyingly honest. He doesn't love you. He just likes that you love him. That voice was still small then. I hadn't learned how to listen yet. I remember writing in my journal that night. I called it love, but it was the echo of my own ache. Aryan never hit me, never screamed, never belittled me outright. His cruelty wore cologne and soft eyes. It said, "I'm just not good at this stuff," when I asked for more. It said, "You knew what I was like," when I cried in the middle of a call. It said nothing at all when I begged, without words, to matter. And I bent until I cracked. I turned my intensity into apology, my longing into silence, my identity into accommodation. I used to believe love was sacrifice, but with Aryan, I didn't offer pieces of myself. I surrendered them, quietly, willingly, and he took them like someone was never taught to ask. He didn't pull away all at once. It was gradual, like a tide retreating before you realize you're ankle-deep in absence. There were no slammed doors or cruel words, just less. Less presence, less warmth, fewer messages, shorter calls, smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. And I, ever the loyal believer in subtle redemption arcs, didn't panic, not right away. I rationalized. He's just overwhelmed. He's tired. He's wired differently. Excuses became my lullaby. When Aryan started canceling plans, he did it in a tone so casual it felt like a favor. "Rain check?" he'd text. "Today's a mess." The first few times, I offered understanding. The next few, I offered silence. But eventually, I started offering pieces. My time, my excuses, my softness. I'd dress for dinners that never happened, reapply lipstick just to sit in silence and tell my reflection it was fine, that he was worth waiting for, that real love required patience. The cancellations became a rhythm I memorized, and like a song you hate but still hum, I let it play in the background of my life. One night, I waited by the window. He'd said he might drop by. I didn't eat, didn't turn on the lights, just sat with the screen dimmed and the air heavy. I watched headlights that weren't his, imagined footsteps that never came. He texted 3 hours later. "Totally wiped, sorry." I replied with a heart, and hated myself for it. But that was the thing. His rejection didn't come sharp. It came dressed in exhaustion, in soft detachment, in the way he always made it feel like my needs were interruptions, my emotions, noise. And I had been trained to be quiet. My father used to say, "I like it when you're calm. You think better when you're quiet." I learned to swallow opinions, hold back questions, nod, even when I wanted to scream. My mother modeled the choreography. Apologies for taking up space, apologies for asking twice, apologies for needing anything. They never said, "Don't feel." They just made it clear I should feel less. And so I did, even as a child. I learned to tidy up my tears, to offer silence wrapped in a smile. That was the language of survival. And Aryan, he spoke it fluently. He never demanded I change. He just withdrew when I showed too much. I remember skipping therapy one day because he said I was too in my head. I remember laughing when he made a joke about my paintings being a little depressing. I remember telling my friends I was busy when really, I just didn't want to explain why I hadn't picked up a brush in weeks. I lied to them, lied to myself. "It's a phase," I'd whisper. "I'm evolving." But the truth? I was vanishing. Every unspoken word became a thread pulled loose. Every silenced instinct frayed the edges of who I used to be. I started talking slower, softer. Changed my ringtone again. He said my favorite, and I just sat in the dark with a store-bought tart on the counter, untouched. He didn't take that moment from me. I gave it away. Piece by piece, I kept offering slices of myself on plates he never asked for, and still, he never looked full. A few days later, my friend Priya caught me staring blankly at a wall in a cafe. I had agreed to meet her after weeks of dodging her calls. "You haven't been yourself lately," she said, voice soft but firm. I smiled, sharp and thin. Maybe I was never myself to begin with. It was supposed to be a joke, but I saw the way her expression shifted, saw the way her shoulders tightened. I saw concern, yes, but also recognition. Because I wasn't just disappearing from him, I was disappearing from everyone. And still, I wasn't ready to leave. Because leaving would mean admitting I was never loved, that I had been performing pain for a man who never saw the bruises. And if he didn't see me, had I ever existed at all? I walked home that night, slower than usual. The sky above was cloudless, wide and cold, and for the first time, I felt the absence not as heartbreak, but as a mirror. Because what terrified me most wasn't that he was withdrawing. It was that I had nothing left to offer that wasn't already his. I became fluent in his absence. There's a rhythm to missing someone who doesn't want to be held, a cadence you learn to survive in. It sounds like the hollow buzz of unanswered messages and the quiet ritual of pretending you weren't waiting. I made tea I didn't drink, rewrote texts I never sent. I sat in the bathtub until my skin wrinkled, as if soaking in stillness might cleanse the ache. When Aryan disappeared for days again, I didn't spiral, not like before. I journaled. And this time, I made it sound like art. He's the storm and I am the field, open, waiting, carved hollow by thunder. Some people love loudly, he doesn't. But silence has its own devotion, doesn't it? He disappears to feel safe. I stay so he remembers where safety lives. I wrote these things in cursive, on cream paper, with a fountain pen I bought just for him. I wasn't healing, I was decorating my delusion. He hadn't replied in 71 hours, and still I checked our last messages like they were sacred. Still, I listened to old voicemails like psalms. There was one where he said my name at the end of a call, not sweetly, just plainly, like punctuation, and I'd replay that single syllable over and over, because when you're starving, even a whisper can feel like a feast. I cleaned the apartment twice, folded the laundry even though half of it was still warm, lit the candle he once said he liked, vanilla and cedarwood, and watched it burn without blinking. I didn't call him, I wanted to. My hands hovered over my phone like it was a live wire, but I told myself restraint was power. I thought silence made me strong. I had confused endurance with worth. Flashback. I'm 7 years old, sitting at the dinner table. My father eats in silence, reading the newspaper between bites. My mother serves food with soft hands and bowed eyes. I reach for the salt too loudly, and his hand stills midair. Quiet, he says, not cruelly, but with finality. So I eat slowly, carefully, hoping the absence of sound will earn his approval. At the end of dinner, he says, "Good girl." I carry that praise like a prize. Back to present. 3 days after disappearing, Aryan texts, "Missed you." That's it. No explanation, no apology, just 2 words. I stared at my screen like it was scripture. My breath caught, not in fear, but relief. Relief so loud it drowned the resentment I had carefully cultivated. My heart, traitorous and naive, answered before my mouth did. I texted back, "I missed you too." And just like that, I folded. We met later that night. He didn't kiss me when I opened the door, just walked in, shrugged off his jacket, collapsed on my couch like he belonged there, like he hadn't left me pacing the length of my soul for days. I didn't ask where he was. I didn't demand an answer. I just memorized his voice again, how it dipped when he said my name, how it rose when he laughed at his own jokes. I watched him eat the pasta I made and told myself this was intimacy, that his hunger for my presence, however brief, meant something. And in that moment, I truly believed, maybe I am too intense. Maybe he just needs me to be steady. Maybe love is about weathering the quiet seasons. Maybe this is what devotion looks like when you strip it of fantasy. But I knew better. Somewhere deep, a voice whispered, "You are not loved. You are tolerated." And still, I hushed it. He didn't lie, I told myself. He just let me believe, and I turned that into love. Because love without honesty is fiction, and I was an excellent author of make-believe. I told my friends I was fine. Told myself it wasn't that big a deal. I even laughed about it in passing. "He's just a little distant sometimes," I'd say, as if that distance didn't swallow entire days. As if I wasn't contorting myself into a woman worthy of breadcrumbs. Later that week, he didn't respond to a question about the weekend, just changed the subject. I smiled. Not because I was okay, because I was practiced, because I had learned to dress my humiliation in grace. It was easier to narrate the story than confront it, to imagine that Aryan's absences were sacred pilgrimages, that he left to find himself, and I was the altar he always returned to. I made him mythic, so I didn't have to admit he was simply unkind. I made his absence sound beautiful. But beauty doesn't hold you when you cry into your own palms at midnight. Beauty doesn't text back. I lay in bed that night, tracing the outline of where his body had been on the sheets. He always left early, before the sun, like affection was a secret he regretted in the daylight. And me? I stayed. Because staying was easier than rebuilding, than facing the ugly truth that I had offered so much of myself to someone who only knew how to receive, someone who fed on my longing like it was currency. And what terrified me most wasn't losing him. It was having to admit I'd never really had him at all. I looked at the mirror across from my bed. My reflection was barely visible, a silhouette against the dark. And I thought, maybe that's all I've become. A shadow. Faint, framed, but never whole. It started with silence again. But this time, it felt different. Not louder, just longer. More weighted. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room. It presses against your ribcage like a slow, steady hand. A warning. A lesson. It had been 4 days since Aryan last replied. No fight. No tension. Just a gradual fade, like watching a candle burn down to its last shimmer of flame. The kind of slow departure that offers no drama, just disinterest. And maybe that's what made it worse. Because how do you mourn something that didn't even say goodbye? I told myself not to reach out, told myself silence could be strength. But each hour without him chipped away at that illusion until I was standing in front of my window at dusk, phone in hand, watching the blue of the sky sink into gray. That's when I sent it. Just one message. Thinking of you. No demands, no expectations. Just a breadcrumb of softness, handed to a man who had long since stopped being hungry. And then, I waited. Hours passed. I folded laundry I didn't care about, drank lukewarm tea, sat in the shower long after the water ran cold. The room around me blurred, and I stared at my phone so long it began to feel like a mirror, reflecting not his silence, but mine. Then, finally, at 1:46 a.m., it lit up. His name, a single text. "You always overthink things, calm down." That was it. 7 words. No greeting, no tenderness, no warmth, not even punctuation. And in that instant, something didn't snap. It settled, like ice forming over still water, quiet, final. The moment didn't hurt, not the way the others had. I didn't gasp or cry or clutch my chest like in the movies. I just stared at the message, and for the first time, I didn't fold. I froze. Not in fear, but in clarity, because suddenly it was so obvious. The ache wasn't temporary, the imbalance wasn't accidental, the silence wasn't circumstantial. It was design. He didn't care if I was thinking of him. He didn't even wonder why I reached out. He just assumed he was entitled to my thoughts, my softness, my waiting. And for so long, I had let him be. Like a god I worshipped out of habit. I put the phone down, face down, screen off. I could still feel the glow behind my eyelids like an after-image burned into my nerves. But I didn't pick it up again. I didn't stare, didn't draft a reply. Because there was no reply left in me. Not this time. Flashback. I'm 10 years old, standing outside my bedroom door with a math test in my hand. I scored 92. I'm proud. I know I am. But I hesitate. Because my father only praises perfection, and anything less is a reason to be quiet. So I don't show him. I tuck the paper under my pillow and go to bed early, pretending I'm tired. I tell myself that hiding it is strength, that silence is armor, that protecting someone else's comfort is more important than celebrating my own worth. I learned then what I remembered now. Silence isn't always strength. Sometimes it's surrender in disguise. Present day. I opened the message again just once more. Read it slowly, like a ritual. Let each word press against the bruises I no longer flinched from. You always overthink things. Calm down. But what if my overthinking was just me noticing? What if my noise was just a heartbeat trying not to flatline? I deleted the message. Not just from my phone. From the version of myself who kept trying to make excuses for a man who could gut me with a single phrase and call it reason. I didn't block him, didn't rage, didn't type out a monologue of pain for him to skim and forget. I simply let him fall out of orbit. Because I had spent so long revolving around him, shrinking, distorting, burning just to stay warm in his gravity. And now, there was no gravity left. The air in the room shifted. The candle on my desk flickered once, then went out. I didn't relight it. I let the darkness return. For the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt honest. I lay down in bed, the sheets cool against my skin, and breathed like it mattered, like I had earned it, like I didn't owe him a single ounce of explanation. And somewhere inside me, something whispered, not in anger, but in peace. You thought I'd beg again. But something finally broke. And it wasn't me. Healing didn't arrive like thunder. It didn't break open the sky or sweep me into a cinematic montage of glow-ups and revenge. It came like a hush. A pause. A whisper I almost didn't hear, because I had trained myself to only respond to noise, to urgency, to the chase of someone walking away. But his time, no one was walking, no one was returning. It was just me. Finally, still. After I deleted Aryan's message, I didn't cry. That confused me. I expected grief to demand a spectacle, ripped pages, slammed doors, maybe even one last desperate monologue into the voice recorder I never admitted I used. Instead, I sat in the center of the living room floor and stared at my own hands. They looked unfamiliar, hollowed out. And then, suddenly, I realized I hadn't painted in months. The realization hit like a silent scream, not because art was just a hobby, but because it had once been the only place I told the truth. Long before Aryan, long before shrinking became my love language, I painted every time I felt too much. Canvas was the only space where my emotions weren't too intense. They were color, stroke, texture, motion. I walked to the closet, pulled out the old wooden box I used to call my altar. Brushes, tubes of acrylic, smudged palettes. It smelled like memory, linseed oil, dried paint, the ghost of turpentine. I sat on the floor, canvas blank before me, and just stared. I didn't know what I was painting. I only knew it had to be in black and red. The first stroke felt clumsy. My hands shook. I painted a silhouette. Not a person, not really, just a shape. A hollow outline of something that had been erased 1 inch at a time. Then I surrounded it with streaks, jagged, blood-toned, flame-colored. Not carefully applied, but desperate, angry, alive. It looked like erosion. and it looked like rebirth. That was the first time I heard it. The whisper. Healing isn't a performance. It's remembrance. I didn't post about it, didn't call anyone. I just painted until my fingers cramped and the room smelled like pigment. When I stepped back, my breath caught. Not from pride, but from recognition. I hadn't just painted grief. I had painted myself. The self I had betrayed for his approval. The self I had silenced, bent, edited. And now, she was outlined in color, unapologetically visible. The next morning, I unblocked my therapist. It wasn't dramatic. No long explanation, just a quiet, "Can we talk?" in a message box I hadn't opened in 6 months. She replied within the hour. "I've missed you," she said in our session. I didn't say it back. But my silence wasn't performance this time. It was space. Honest, necessary space. I didn't need to be fixed. I needed to be found. Flashback. I'm 15, sketching in my notebook at the back of a noisy classroom. The teacher's voice fades beneath the sound of my pencil scratching curved lines. Someone behind me snorts. "You really think that stuff's deep?" I don't turn around. But I stop drawing. I close the notebook. Tell myself maybe they're right. Present day. I opened my old journals. Some entries were pure longing. Others were apologies in disguise. A few were confessions I didn't realize I had been making. If I can stay soft, maybe I can stay loved. But the entry that broke me open wasn't the most poetic. It was a scrawl across the bottom of a tear-stained page. I'm disappearing, and he doesn't notice. I closed the journal, lit the candle again, not the one Aryan liked, but my own. Rose and smoke, the scent I used when I painted poems on my bedroom walls as a teenager. I took walks alone after that. No music, just the rhythm of my own steps. I watched how sunlight hit the buildings, sat on benches without checking my phone. It was a strange thing, being present in a world that had always required me to disappear to be accepted. But the strangest part? I missed him. Not in the way I expected. I didn't miss his voice, his body, his texts. I missed the idea of him, the version I created to survive what he never gave. I missed the me who believed that love was worth being leading for. But I missed myself more, the version who laughed without waiting for permission, the girl who used to wake up and create before she checked if someone else approved. I was never meant to be small. I had just learned to survive that way. The painting hung in the hallway by the third week of silence. I hadn't spoken to Aryan. He hadn't tried. For the first time, I didn't read that as punishment. I read it as space. Space I no longer needed to fill with apology. I stood before the painting one night, candle flickering at my feet, and whispered to no one. I used to write love poems. Now I write warnings in color. It was a Sunday morning, clear and quiet. One of those rare days where the sky feels like a clean slate, and the air itself carries no expectations. I had just come back from the flower market. My hands still smelled like eucalyptus and crushed lavender, and my fingertips were stained with soil. There was a loaf of bread warming in the oven. The windows were open. The wind moved through my apartment like it belonged there. And that's when my phone buzzed. One single message. His name, still pinned near the top of my screen like a scar I hadn't fully erased. "Hey, you good?" Just that. No punctuation, no acknowledgement of time past, no responsibility, as if silence was a faucet he could turn off and on at will, as if I were still the girl who would tremble at his crumbs, who would shrink her voice into something sweet just to feel chosen again. But I didn't tremble, my breath didn't catch. There was no script playing in my head, no list of draft replies composed at midnight in case he ever returned. Instead, I just stood there, holding my phone, feeling breath. That was it. Not panic, not poetry, just breath. He was reaching out to a version of me that no longer existed. I walked over to the kitchen, set the phone down beside the bread, and sliced into the loaf. The sound was clean, satisfying, real. And I realized I didn't want to explain anything to him. Not my silence, not my sadness, not the shape of the healing he abandoned before it ever began. Because healing doesn't come with performance. It's not a story you owe the one who broke you. He didn't deserve an update on the survival he never stayed for. Flashback. I'm 12. I've been crying for half an hour after my father scolded me for talking back during dinner. My mother slips into the room, sits at the edge of the bed, and wipes my face without speaking. I want her to say he was wrong. I want her to say I was right. But all she says is, "Just don't make it worse next time, sweetheart. Be quiet. That's how things settle." And in that moment, I learned that silence doesn't just mean peace. It means surrender. Present day. I picked the phone back up and opened the message. Read it once. Slowly. Let it land. And then I realized something that stopped me cold. I didn't want him to want me back. Not out of pride. Not out of revenge. Just clarity. Because what I had finally rebuilt, those first fragile layers of self-respect, of creative expression, of breathing without guilt, felt realer than anything we had ever been. I didn't need to be missed. I needed to be intact. And so I didn't reply. Not to punish him, but to protect me. I went about my day, watered the plants, swept the porch, repainted a canvas I'd been avoiding. It wasn't that I forgot the message. I just didn't let it narrate the hours anymore. Later, over coffee with Priya, she stared at me with narrowed eyes and said, "You look different. You've got this, I don't know, stillness." I smiled, small and true. I think I finally ran out of space for him. She didn't push, just reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. The old me would have read his message 100 times, would have drafted poetic responses, would have whispered them aloud like spells. This version? She deleted it before sunset. That was the power, not in the silence, but in the detachment. The calm knowledge that my story no longer required his punctuation. He was a chapter I outgrew mid-sentence. And the best part? No one had to know. No grand declarations. No public empowerment arc. Just one simple truth carved deep into the bone of my being. I survived him without needing him to see it. I stood in front of my hallway painting that night. The black silhouette, the violent streaks of red and fire-brushed orange. I had added new lines to it over the weeks. Softer ones, hints of gold at the edges. The outline was still there, but it no longer looked hollow. It looked sacred. And then, in a whisper meant only for myself, I said it. "You never saw the damage you caused, and I'm done trying to explain my survival to you." It happened in the middle of laughter. Someone said his name, casually, as part of a story I wasn't even fully listening to. Aryan. No last name, no context. Just a syllable dropped into the room like a pebble into still water. I didn't flinch. I didn't pause mid-sip. My spine didn't stiffen and my breath didn't catch. I brought the porcelain cup to my lips, let the tea settle on my tongue, and swallowed. The room stayed in motion. My pulse didn't shift. That was the moment I knew. The storm had passed. And I wasn't the girl gripping the window frame anymore. I was the sky. The conversation around me flowed on, unaware of the revolution that had just taken place inside me. There were no fireworks, no cinematic music, no sudden blur of tears. Just stillness. I smiled softly at something someone said about a vacation. My eyes didn't drift to my phone. My fingers didn't itch to write. It was as if the name that once defined an era had turned back into just that, a name. Later, when I got home, I found myself scrolling through old photos. Not because I missed him, but because I wanted to face it, all of it. The full archive of a love that was more performance than promise. There he was in the pictures, half smiles, averted eyes, hands barely touching. I stared at the girl beside him. Me. The way she leaned slightly in, always closing the gap. The way her eyes searched his face, trying to find something that looked like reflection. And then, I saw it. He wasn't love. He was a mirror for my oldest wound. Every time he disappeared, it echoed my father's silence. Every time he dismissed my feelings, it repeated the small, unspoken rules I had grown up breathing. Be quiet, be less, don't need too much. I hadn't loved Aryan. I had loved the version of me that still believed she had to earn love by bleeding. And now I could look at her with compassion and let her go. I closed the gallery, not out of pain, out of peace. He wasn't powerful. He was empty, a shell that echoed with the voices of every woman he'd ever made feel too loud, too clingy, too emotional. And I, once a devoted believer in his mystery, had finally learned the difference between depth and distance. He wasn't deep. He was hollow. And I had spent too long pouring myself into him, thinking I could fill the void. But voids don't get full. They feed. Flashback. I'm 16. My best friend says, "You're so mature for your age," after I clean up her boyfriend's mess and tell her not to cry in front of him. I beam with pride, not realizing that being mature was code for you know how to abandon yourself quietly. Present day. I no longer perform maturity through suppression. I no longer call self-denial strength. That script is burned. Friends had started to notice, even before I did. Priya once said, "There's something in your smile now, like it's yours again." And she was right. It was mine again. The painting in the hallway had changed too. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but somehow it looked fuller, like time itself had drawn new meaning into its strokes. The black silhouette was no longer just hollow. It was grounded, surrounded by the red streaks that once symbolized pain but now looked more like firelight, like something still alive. I stood before it one evening, wineglass in hand, and realized I no longer needed to explain the symbolism. It was me, not a wound, a warning. They say heartbreak changes people, but the truth is, I was never broken. I was bound, and I unlearned him one boundary at a time. There were people, well-meaning, gentle people, who said I'd become cold, that I didn't glow the way I used to, that I seemed untouchable now. And maybe they were right, but they didn't know what it had cost me to be soft. Soft was bleeding in silence. Soft was apologizing for breathing too loudly in rooms I paid to be in. Soft was loving someone who never asked questions about my day. So no, I wasn't soft anymore. I was whole. And that was a revolution too quiet for applause. I lit a candle that night, not for closure, for sovereignty, and in the hush of my own apartment, I whispered the words no one else would ever hear but me. They thought I became colder. No, I just stopped bleeding for those who never carried the knife. I never say I'm over him, because that would imply he was something I needed to climb, conquer, bury, and he wasn't. He was a shadow I mistook for shelter, a whisper I thought was prophecy, a hollow that echoed my name only when I was small enough to fit inside it. So no, I'm not over him. I just reclaimed myself. That's harder, it takes longer, and no one claps for it. There's no revenge arc, no dramatic confrontation on a rain-soaked street, no final text message with the perfect goodbye. What happened between us didn't end with a bang or a betrayal. It ended the moment I stopped offering the pieces of me he never earned. That's the part no one teaches you, how to stop giving. Because giving is easy. It makes you feel generous, good, worthy. But stopping, especially when it costs your soul, is power. The quiet, gut-wrenching kind. The kind you build in silence brick by brick, after years of convincing yourself that love must be earned through erosion. I stopped offering. And that's when the story ended. Not for him, for me. He still texts sometimes, once every few months, a like on an old photo, a thinking of you dropped at 1 a.m. like a drunk apology with no return address. I don't block him, I don't engage, I don't make a performance out of silence, I just let the messages collect like dust on a shelf I no longer clean. Because I don't need to prove anything to him. I've already proven everything to myself. There's a painting above my desk now. The same one I started on the floor of my apartment, fingers trembling, breath tight, unsure if I was bleeding or creating or both. It used to be chaos, black silhouette, red streaks, evidence of damage. But over time, I added more. Not corrections, just truth. Gold at the edges, pale lavender at the base, thin veins of blue that run upward like something that once drowned, now learning how to breathe again. People who see it call it powerful. They don't know what it cost. There's a note on my fridge, my mother's birthday. It's underlined, highlighted. I already bought her gift, a silly ceramic mug with a sunflower painted on it and a message that reads, "You are not invisible." I don't know if she'll understand the gesture, but I need to give it anyway. For her, for me, for the generations of women in my family who were taught to hold their breath until someone told them they were safe to speak. I remember a time I missed that birthday, skipped it, told her work came up. In truth, I had stayed home with Aryan, waiting for him to show up. He didn't. I cried that night, not because of him, but because of me. Because I knew what I'd abandoned, and I did it anyway. But now, I don't abandon. I choose. I choose to show up. Not for him, not for anyone waiting for me to shrink, but for the version of myself who used to fold in on command. She's gone now. And the woman who rose? She never offers pieces, only presence. I see it now, so clearly it burns. The twist isn't that he lost me. The twist is that he was never strong. I was. Because surviving someone like him doesn't mean proving they were wrong. It means realizing they were never powerful to begin with. He took and took. But I stopped offering. And in that quiet, unceremonious decision, I wrote my own ending. Flashback. I'm 8, writing a story in my school notebook. My teacher asks me what it's about. I say, "It's about a girl who gets quiet so people will like her." She smiles and says, "That's sad." I cross out the ending. I write, "She grows wings." Present day. I look out the window now and think about all the stories I let him co-author, all the pages I edited just to keep him comfortable. Never again. Because I'm not a subplot. I'm not the cautionary tale. I'm not the aftermath. I'm the author. And this time, I didn't write him in. We're taught that strength means staying, enduring, giving. But sometimes the truest strength is in stopping, in walking away, in reclaiming the self you silenced just to feel seen. So tell me, what piece of yourself are you ready to take back today? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story felt like yours, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember they are not too much. They were never too little either.